Fox News Podcast presents Brett Baer's All-Star Panel.
America's got to be in the lead if you want to deal with these threats. We're going to lead.
The mourning is over. The Shiva is done. And if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic.
You know, my main priority right now is making sure that it delivers for the American people.
We have to make our country great again, and I will do that.
I think the president gets criticized by people all the time for the stuff he says, by people who ignore what he does.
Now, Fox's chief political anchor, Brett Baer.
Fox News has confirmed after 15 months at war, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire deal that ensures the hostages' release, though the news has yet to be confirmed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Both Israeli and Hamas negotiators confirmed separately that a deal was reached on Wednesday. President-elect Trump took to Truth Social, commenting on the deal, saying his national security team will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. Meantime, President Biden praised the effort of his administration. Meanwhile, with less than a week until Inauguration Day, 13 of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks are facing questions from senators on Capitol Hill, with Secretary of Defense nominee Pete Hegseth being the first to appear before the Senate Armed Services Committee Tuesday.
What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose.
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense if you drink on the job, which is a 24/7 position?
I've made this commitment on behalf of the men and women I'm serving.
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense
I've made this commitment on behalf of the men and women I'm serving.
I'm not
because
hearing,
it's the most important deployment
I'm
of
not
my
hearing an
life,
answer to my question.
as I've acknowledged.
Here at home, first responders continue fighting vicious fires throughout Los Angeles, and community members band together to support those who've lost everything as another surge of strong winds creates another dangerous situation. To discuss this and more, we bring in our panel, Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram, Washington bureau chief of USA Today, Susan Page, and host of the Ben Domenech podcast, Ben Domenech. Susan, there was a press conference where the president, flanked by the vice president and the secretary of state, talked about this deal. And, you know, it obviously comes just days before he leaves office and will be implemented in the days of President Trump assuming power again.
Yes, and what's surprising about this deal, reached with the cooperation and the efforts of both the current and the incoming president. That is a rare thing at any time. It is particularly rare at this particular moment in our political history, and that is, I think, pretty notable. I think that's something that Americans like to see: cooperation across party lines to get things done that are clearly good for the world, good for the United States.
Well, it's true. And the State Department spokesperson said when it comes to the involvement of President-elect Trump's team, it has been absolutely critical in getting this deal over the line. They both have talked about the efforts of the other side. Steve Witkoff, Trump's Middle East envoy, saying the same, Ben. But when asked after the press briefing about the involvement of President-elect Trump, President Biden turned around and smirked and said, "Is that a joke?" So the message didn't get all the way to the top dog there. But it's interesting to see how this comes together and what it means big picture for the Middle East.
Well, I think what it means is that you're trying to get things on as an even of status as you possibly can with a new president coming in and with all the changes that are going to be made in terms of policy toward the Middle East. We can anticipate some of those changes just based on the previous perspectives. You know, obviously, Marco Rubio was testifying on Capitol Hill today as the incoming and expected next Secretary of State. The whole change when it comes to foreign policy, I think, is perhaps going to be the most dramatic. You know, we look at all the other areas of policy, and of course, there's going to be significant change from what the Biden administration did. But when it came to foreign policy, I think that the team that Donald Trump is putting in place is really going to go in opposite directions in so many different respects as it relates to the team that Biden had there. And so the fact that they were able to, I think, work fairly closely, according to a lot of the reports that we've heard, and including the people who I've talked to behind the scenes, is, I think, actually a positive indication that there was not such a level of animosity on the staff level that would have prevented something like this from occurring. There's still some details that need to be ironed out, and obviously this still needs to go through the approval process. But I think it's a positive development, and it sets things on, as I said, a more even status going forward into this new administration, when I think that they have a lot of things on their mind. Certainly you look around at the state of the world, the coup in South Korea, you have the situation, obviously, in Syria, you have concerns about Iran, you have concerns about China, you have concerns about Russia and ending the Ukraine war. There's so many different things on their list that at least dealing with one of them before you actually get into office is a benefit, I think, in terms of trying to get some focus on all the different priorities that this new foreign policy, national security staff is going to have to deal with.
Chad, this is all happening in the backdrop of confirmation hearings for President-elect Trump's nominees. The deal in the Middle East coming during Secretary of State nominee Marco Rubio's hearing, and he reacted real time. Is there any sense that Republicans are wavering at all on any of the nominees?
We haven't really gotten that sense. I mean, I think that there was some concern initially with Pete Hegseth. They seemed to have righted the ship some weeks ago there. There was certainly consternation back in late November about Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General. They basically applauded Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, for the job. So there's still reservations about Tulsi Gabbard to be the Director of National Intelligence, and certainly Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They certainly face an uncertain fate, in particular Gabbard. But I would expect them to move pretty expeditiously, maybe as early as Monday night, on at least some of the low-hanging fruit. Members want to confirm some of these national security portfolio nominees here, and I would look maybe on Monday night, just a few hours after President-elect Trump is sworn in, to maybe have a Senate vote on Marco Rubio to be the Secretary of State. John Ratcliffe, former Republican congressman, former Director of National Intelligence. He's up for CIA Director. I would expect him to be confirmed as well. Kirsten Gillibrand, the Democrat from New York, said that he answered a lot of her questions during his confirmation today. She had questions about the pandemic and how the intelligence community would handle a future pandemic, and she said she was satisfied with those answers. I might also look at somebody like Sean Duffy, the former Republican congressman from Wisconsin, who's up to be the transportation secretary. Not a national security portfolio necessarily, but they want to say, let's knock out as many as they can. History has shown us that we usually have one or two confirmed on Inauguration Day. Avril Haines, who is the Director of National Intelligence right now, was confirmed on Inauguration night for President Biden in 2021 and in 2017. They confirmed James Mattis to be the Defense Secretary, and also John Kelly to be the Secretary of Homeland Security in 2017 for President-elect Trump. And so I would expect some of that to happen maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday. In terms of Hegseth, Democrats might filibuster that. You might have a situation where John Thune, the majority leader, has to file cloture and they have to go through the process there. So that probably takes a little bit longer, frankly.
But as far as Republicans standing together, we were watching Joni Ernst in the Armed Services Committee hearing. She then came out in favor of Pete Hegseth. It doesn't seem like they're losing Republicans.
No, not on that. Todd Young, the Republican from Indiana, who some people thought might be in play. We've not heard from Susan Collins just yet, the Republican senator from Maine, who sometimes is a swing vote, and same with Lisa Murkowski. And I should note that, they could lose a couple of Republicans there, even if these Republicans hold their cards close to their vest. They will have 53 Republicans in the Senate. That presumes that Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, send somebody to Washington to replace J.D. Vance, who resigned. Jim Justice was sworn in just yesterday, the Republican senator now from West Virginia, because he didn't want to leave the governorship So West Virginia wouldn't go through 4 governors in a matter of a couple of days. So they're not quite at full power just yet, but you're absolutely right. There's still a couple of people maybe on the fence that we haven't heard from yet. Susan Collins, Murkowski, et cetera. They're often the swing votes here, but they do have 53 votes to work with in the Senate on the Republican side of the aisle.
Susan, meantime, President Biden gives a farewell address from the Oval Office tonight. He did one at the State Department on foreign policy last week. This is the goodbye. What do you think will come out of that and the analysis of the Biden administration, as obviously voters decided to turn the page in the election?
Yes, not the farewell speech he wanted to give, not the time he wanted to give it. He wanted 4 more years. He leaves office quite unpopular. His approval rating in our new poll was 41%. That's really anemic for a president. We ask Americans what was Biden's biggest accomplishment. We gave them a choice of 8 things, and 30%, a plurality, said that they couldn't choose one. Nothing struck them as his greatest accomplishment. That is a sobering political situation for the exiting president to face. I think we're going to see him try to make the case that he was a consequential president who came in during a crisis, during the pandemic, that he navigated things, avoided a recession, and I think President Biden and his team hope that the passage of time improves history's judgment of his presidency, because it is true that he is leaving office on a low note.
Yeah, Ben, your thoughts?
Well, I certainly think he is leaving office on a low note. I agree with Susan on that, obviously. I don't know exactly how he's going to go about turning around things when it comes to his legacy, at least in the immediate. There's so many decisions that he's made, in addition, since the election day that have been, I think, at odds with what Americans expected of him. I recall, obviously, so many figures coming forward and saying that the fact that the president had chosen not to pardon his son was an indication of his personal, moral, consequential attitude towards the justice system and our system of law and order. And then to turn around and do exactly that, I think undermines it. I do want to circle back to something that Chad said, which I think is illustrative of the problem that Democrats face. Obviously, you have to take away a number of different members of the Senate on the Republican side in order to block any of these cabinet nominees. The way that you approach confirmation hearing, and I say this as a former Senate staffer myself many years ago, is that you work backwards from whatever goal you want to achieve, whatever person you want to influence. Instead, I think what we saw was something that resembled more of a House hearing as it related to Pete Hegseth, where you're trying to just get viral moments and the like, where you can say that you're dunking on someone, or having Senator Reid have him explain what jagoff means, and that kind of thing, and applauding it perhaps as something that's a positive moment for you. That doesn't influence Susan Collins. That's not something that's going to shift her in your direction, or Joni Ernst. And I think that what we've really seen is that this whole advise and consent process may be turning into something that resembles more of the loud and fractious scenes that we've seen on the House side, which have not actually resulted in committee votes or in committee shifts that have changed anything. That's something that I think is a bad thing for the country. I think that advise and consent and looking at these nominees seriously is important, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat senator. But I would point out, there was only really one controversial nominee that was put forward by Joe Biden, and that was Javier Becerra, who ended up getting approved by, I believe, 50 to 49 in terms of his final vote. Virtually everyone else, skated through. Anthony Blinken had 78 votes for him. And so it will be interesting to see a comparison when it comes to Donald Trump's staff and the people that he's putting into place. But they are going to be people that I think are going to be targeted at the Biden agenda in many ways. They are going to be the opposite of what he was offering the American people. Maybe that's not what they want, but they certainly didn't want more of the same.
Panel, we'll hold it right there. Chad, meantime, Capitol Hill is trying to move forward with the Trump agenda, but it's going to be tough trying to get everything packed into one big, beautiful bill.
It is really remarkable because, when you talk to some of the New York Republicans, these are one of the reasons why they have a majority in the House of Representatives, starting in the last Congress and continuing into this Congress. They're going to want, something done on SALT, which is state and local tax reductions here. That is a budget buster, frankly, right there. They need their votes. You talk about the wildfires and the cost there. That's going to have to be in some bill coming up very soon. And again, the reality is they can only lose one vote. And this business about one bill, two bill, that's a lot of Washington speak here. I should note that when they dealt with Obamacare, back in 2009, 2010, the Democrats ultimately had to cleave that bill into two parts and then marry it back together. That's not the worst thing that they could have in front of them right now. But again, what if the House adopts something and the Senate wants to do something else? I realize that they are talking constantly. Constantly. You had a bunch of Republicans down at Mar-a-Lago last weekend. You're going to have the Republican retreat here in a couple of weeks at Doral. You had this big forum the day after the Congress started at Fort McNair with Republicans. They're talking constantly. But again, this is the legislative process, and it is so hard. And this is where Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, laid out, kind of a timetable, get a budget out in February, which is always very hard to pass, frankly. And you have to have a budget in place in order to do budget reconciliation. You can't do this magical thing to get past a Senate filibuster called reconciliation unless you have a budget in place and then maybe get, the final thing done in May. That's going to be hard. So they're starting with things that they can work on right now. And before the Senate right now, Brett, is the Laken-Riley Act. That passed with a wide, swath of Democrats in the House of Representatives. There's a lot of Democrats, moderate Democrats, some from swing states, Alyssa Slotkin, John Fetterman, Ruben Gallego, a freshman from Arizona who won, who are for this. I think it's very possible that they will be able to get 60 votes on that later. People say, well, wait a minute, they got 85 on the first procedural vote. Why does it go down? Well, some Democrats wanted a lot more. They were willing to at least start the debate. But they'll probably get this through the Senate, and this might be the very first piece of legislation put on President-elect Trump's desk sometime early next week. So that is low-hanging fruit, but it's important to Republicans and Democrats have kind of gotten religion here where they're like, hey, we were kind of asleep on at the switch on border security, on these issues. We were tone deaf to that issue, and that's why more Democrats have jumped on board on this. The one issue that's probably not going to move across the finish line, and this was a bit of an issue in the election, Republicans drift more toward this too, is this bill that passed the House of Representatives that would ban transgender athletes in female sports. There were only 2 Democrats who voted for that in the House of Representatives, and very, very sketchy that could ever clear a Senate filibuster.
Finally, Susan, you've got some Democrats who are clearly making a different choice. John Fetterman going down to Mar-a-Lago, others voting for the Laken-Riley immigration bill. In the Senate and in the House, 48 Democrats voted for it. Is there hope here that maybe there's bipartisan efforts afoot?
Well, Republicans are united behind Donald Trump. He comes into office with such authority that he cowed Joni Ernst into supporting Pete Hegseth when she had been initially very reluctant to do so. But Democrats are not united. Democrats do not yet know what they should do. I think they are in general agreement that what they've been doing hasn't worked for them, having lost this election, having lost the Senate, having failed to regain control of the House. But yes, that gives big opportunities to President Trump because there are Democrats both in the House and the Senate who think the party went astray by not being tougher on immigration, say. They might be willing to support the Laken-Riley Act, for instance, and on other issues too. This is a problem for Democrats, an opportunity for the president as he tries to get some of these big measures through. And we should note that President Trump has not been Donald Trump as president has not been reluctant to take executive action without Congress's okay. And I think one of the things we're watching for is what executive orders he's going to issue maybe on day one that does some of the things that he wants to get done.
Yeah, and we're being told it's going to be north of 100 on all different kinds of topics, Ben. I mean, that's a shock and awe executive order turnaround.
Look, I think that one thing that we can expect from this administration is it's going to be very unique in the sense that the first administration, you had an unexpected win essentially a president who was unprepared, a team that was unprepared to go into the White House, and had a constant feud going on. What we're seeing in early indications here is something that's a lot more organized, that has a good deal more of a lockstep attitude, at least within the White House team, in terms of keeping the president from having a cacophony of people being able to walk through his door and readdress his direction on a daily basis. Now, how long that lasts is a very open question. And so I think that that's going to be the thing that everyone is watching, regardless of whether you're on the right or the left. How long will this new, more focused approach to a Trump administration last, just given how difficult that can be, given the personalities involved?
Well, and final word, Chad, I mean, it's going to be different than 2016 for a year and a half. And the start of that administration, it was the Russia investigation. Many people argue that, it was a defensive President Trump who was, trying to feel out where he was in an Oval Office that I don't think he knew he was going to be in. And now it's a much different President Trump returning to an Oval Office with a staff that's been preparing for this moment for 4+ years.
Yeah, you're probably going to have some mud thrown at the wall and at President-elect Trump from the likes of Jerry Connolly, who's now the ranking Democrat on the Oversight Committee, and Jamie Raskin, the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives. But they will watch to see how the administration handles things. There might very well be issues that they're like, wait a minute, you're not, this is dirty pool, or you're investigating this person, and that's political retribution or something like that. We can certainly see that type of thing coming. But you're right. It's going to be different. It probably helps the president-elect to have a Republican Congress right now. But, and this comes back to the confirmation hearings just a little bit. If you look at the positioning of the Democrats, Chuck Schumer has been very clear, and we talked about those viral moments just a couple of moments ago with Ben. The idea that Democrats are kind of wanting to set the record out there so that if something happens with Hegseth or other nominees who they think aren't ready for prime time, and they come back and say, we asked you about X or we asked you about Y, and then this happened or this came out later, we told you. That's kind of the approach that they're taking, and that's the very, I think, political effort by the Democrats to kind of create this compendium that they can pull out of their drawer at the right moment and say to the public, maybe before the midterms in 2026, say, we told you so. This is how these folks were, and look what you got. And that's why Democrats are performing that way in those hearings. This is about documenting those moments so they can pull them out at the proper moment if the occasion arises.
We will see how long the honeymoon lasts, if there is one. Okay, thanks so much. Now for a bit of history. On January 14th, 1973, the Miami Dolphins capped the NFL's only perfect season by defeating the Washington Redskins in Super Bowl VII. After losing their starting quarterback, Bob Greasy, to injury in Week 5, few were prepared for the all-star season they would go on to have. The veteran backup Earl Morrall leading the team's offense, the Dolphins charged forward, becoming the first and only team in modern NFL history to complete a perfect, undefeated season. They also remain the only Super Bowl champion to win despite having been shut out in the second half of the game. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Susan, Chad, and Ben, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.